Welcome to the And She Looked Up podcast. Each week, we sit down with inspiring Canadian women who create for a living. We talk about their creative journeys and their best business tips, as well as the creative and business mindset issues all creative entrepreneurs struggle with. I'm your host, Melissa Hartfield, and after leaving a 20-year career in corporate retail, I've been happily self-employed for 12 years. I'm a graphic designer, an illustrator, and a multi-six-figure-a-year entrepreneur in the digital content space. This podcast is for the artists, the makers, and the creatives who want to find a way to make a living doing what they love. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of the And She Looked Up podcast. As always, I'm your host, Melissa, and this week I am thrilled to be welcoming Lia Rinaldo, the Managing Director of Devour, the food film festival, to the show. Welcome, Lia.
Thank you so much for having me, Melissa.
I am so excited to talk to you today. I know we have a lot of stuff that we're going to be covering, but before we dive in, let's get to know Lia a little bit better. So Lia knew she found a perfect combination in Devour, the food film festival, when it combined her passion for the film industry and food culture. She started in the movie business as a bright-eyed teenager at Wormwood's Dog and Monkey Cinema, which I had to Google because that is an amazing name. Moving on to the Atlantic Film Festival before making her way to a second career as a freelance food and travel writer for Eat North, Halifax Curated Magazine, Occasions Magazine, North American Traveler, amongst many other publications. She is a member of the Travel Media Association of Canada and the International Food, Wine, and Travel Writers Association, and she also provides culinary marketing, social media, PR, and fundraising consulting services throughout Nova Scotia. She has a long list of honors and awards that she has been presented with, including the Tourism Industry Association of Nova Scotia's Crystal Tourism Award of Excellence, the Taste of Nova Scotia Gary MacDonald Culinary Ambassador Award, Canadian Treasures Award for Innovation in Hospitality by the George Brown Centre for Culinary Arts, and the Progress Women of Excellence Award in Arts and Culture. And she has twice been named to the Chronicle Herald Arts and Life Honor Roll. She currently serves on the national jury for Canada's 100 Best Restaurants, and fueled by her love of food and film, Lia, as the managing director, has utilized her talent for festival coordination to help make Devour the largest film festival in the world dedicated to all things culinary. So that's a lot.
Yeah, when it's listed like that, it sure sounds like it does.
Our paths first crossed when I think Devour was very much still in its infancy. I think you were probably around the second or maybe third iteration of the festival. And it has been so satisfying to watch it grow and watch you guys succeed. It's been such a cool journey to watch you be on.
It's been a fast track. It really feels like that, even though it's been 10 years-ish of Devour now.
Yeah. So before we dive into the rest of the interview, one of the first questions I ask everybody who comes on the show is, did you feel creative as a kid?
It's funny. I do, actually. From the moment I was able to crawl out of my crib as a child, my mother used to always tell me that I'd get out and fix myself a little food and then actually draw quietly to myself. So in this very funny way, I was always told that I was quite creative from the very beginning and kind of able to amuse myself in different ways. One of my favorite stories, again, from that sort of age was I was once watching CBC as a small child, and one of those classic Heritage Minutes came up.
Oh, yes.
And I think it was of an artist, and I can't remember what it was, but I just looked around and said, I want to be a Heritage Minute when I grow up. And that became like a long-running family joke that I just wanted to be a Heritage Minute. So,
oh, well, how cool would that be if that happens?
But I think I meant it more as, a child, I wanted to be the minute. I didn't want to be the person in it. So very funny wacky way to say, yeah, I've always had a sort of creative bent, I think.
Those heritage moments have been making a little bit of a comeback lately too. So,
They actually have, and I think
yeah,
I were trying to dare each other to watch all of them and find a but hey,
very quintessentially Canadian, that's for sure.
yeah, definitely.
So, tell us a little bit about how you got started. So, it sounds like you initially had some kind of draw towards filmmaking or the film industry from a fairly young age.
Yes, definitely. I mean, I was always interested in films from an early age. I started going to Wormwood's Dog and Monkey Cinema that you referenced, the local repertory cinema here, and eventually got a job there when I was 16, slinging popcorn, selling tickets, and cleaning the bathrooms, and kind of got my film education by watching all those years before I actually ended up in Montreal. I basically got there when I was about 19 to go to film school at Concordia, which I promptly dropped out of. And then just kind of I came back to Nova Scotia and came back and started working again back at the cinema. So it kind of solidified my film track, as it were, in this sort of exhibition realm. Because I went from 7 years of working there at the cinema, doing pretty much every job and working my way through everything till I was managing it. And at the same time, I kind of stepped off to the Atlantic Film Festival and slowly over a track of 22 years, worked through every single job. And in the last 10 years, I was the festival director there, sort of head of all the programming and the marketing teams.
Okay, so that makes sense. What was it that made you decide to drop out of film school? Because I think this is something that a lot of people feel like there's always this push-pull, like if I want to be a photographer, do I need to go to school to become a photographer? Am I as good as everybody else if I don't have the formal education kind of thing?
Yeah, I mean, that's always been a big question for a lot of people, I'm sure. I think for me, it was that I was so excited to be on my own in a big city like Montreal that I kind of walked through the hallways and thought, I'm going to have some fun. But I will say, when I did come back to Nova Scotia, I again had entered the Nova Scotia College of Art and Design, NASCAD, and I had an entrance scholarship, so I was doing it at the same time as the cinema, kind of straddling it. And I, again, only lasted a couple of years just because I was so kind of pulled into the work scene and less so about the actual schooling.
Yeah, you were doing the actual doing as opposed to, which I think I can certainly resonate with. I just want to get in there and do stuff. So once you got involved with the Atlantic Film Festival, the Atlantic Film Festival, and you worked your way up to becoming the managing director or a director of, what's the words I'm looking for? you were the one who was curating most of the films. Is that correct? Yeah. Okay. I was gonna say you kind of took a side detour and started writing.
Yeah, that really happened. So through my career at the Atlantic Film Festival, my original love of food, which is kind of where my family's based. My father was named Salvatore, and he ran a very famous, or infamous, I should say, pizza restaurant here in Halifax called Salvatore's New York Trattoria. And he served the first sort of thin slice New York style pizza here in town, a legacy that my brothers have now gone on to carry on with here in Halifax.
That's right. Yes.
So I was always drawn to food, interested in food on the side. It was more of a hobby. It wasn't my career. And I just kept getting pulled into the scene because I just loved to be out and talking to people. And I was one of those very annoying, taking food photos all the time without any direction. And it just kind of slowly evolved into this sideline of work.
What made you wake up one morning and say to yourself, I think I'd like to start a film festival around food? Like, that's not something most of us would wake up one morning and just decide to do. But where did the genesis for that start to?
So basically, while I was at the Atlantic Film Festival, just sort of, we were building it was a very sort of festival trying to serve the Atlantic film community while trying to set its position in the national scene, trying to be the number 4 behind big festivals like Toronto or Montreal. So it was always broadly trying to cover a lot of things. And one day, my current business partner, Michael Howell, who's a chef and a director actor in his own right and his background, kind of marched into the AFF offices with a group of chefs, and they had just mounted their first edition of what at that time was called the Slow Motion Food Film Festival, which is a big handful or mouthful. And they had sort of successfully mounted their first edition in Wolfville, Nova Scotia, a town that's about 45 minutes to an hour from Halifax. But they in terms of being chefs and event managers, they knew what they were doing in that realm, but they were really curious about the film festival side. They had mounted the first edition with a number of retro films, filled restaurants, and had a lot of fun, but they just didn't know how to kind of build it.
Right.
So at the time that he came in, I was probably about 20 years into my time at the AFF, and I was getting a little long in the tooth, a little bored. Just when you're trying to build something that's so big and so broad with no focus other than kind of regionally, to develop a whole theme around one niche and have that sort of laser sharp focus, like it's food, it's wine, it's issues up and down the food chain. It's not every film, every new Canadian film, every film from the region. It just was a breath of fresh air. And I knew from the second that they walked in, I was completely captivated by them, and especially Michael. And I was like, wow, this is my next direction. And I basically told that to my boss at the time. And then it took me about 2 years to kind of slowly remove myself and be able to step off into this new world.
See, that is the whole idea of niching down. I am so fascinated by niching down because I get exactly what you're saying there. There's something about it when you grab onto this little kernel and turn it into something much bigger. And when it's something that's really broad, it's hard to feel super excited about it because it's just so big.
No, it's one of those things where it allows you to, really get behind an idea and a place and develop it and grow connections, because it's not as big a sphere as trying to do something so huge. I mean, although now you could argue this is quite large, but it really allows you to focus in and develop long-term relationships, which is kind of key to becoming a leader in the field, I guess.
Yes, absolutely. And you have become really big, but I think that's really a testament to a lot of people say, oh, you can't do that because it's too small. Not enough people will be interested. You'll never make money, all those kinds of things. And yet you have taken something that is quite niche and you've turned it into something that's recognized around the globe. So, and you're able to pull together a program with over 100 films and activities and events surrounding it. That's, from, if somebody out there wanted to, they could probably niche it down even further, So, I think that's where I find niching to be so fascinating to me, is that I think sometimes the smaller you go, the bigger you can become.
Oh, I think so. And we, in the very beginning, in the early years, we were really bold because we kept telling people we were the world's largest food film festival, and we weren't. But we sort of thought, well, why don't we just keep saying it until it sticks? And it actually is true.
Oh, you weren't?
No.
Oh, no. That's interesting. I didn't know that.
Sort of risk-taking moves. I mean, we've kind of always, even though we're a, not-for-profit and registered charity run by a board, we do run it in the spirit of entrepreneurship between the two of us, just because we're just doers, and we like people and relationships and things, and like to push the line. So we just started. We could always stand behind it in terms of it being the largest in terms of the breadth of the program, with the variety of programming we have. No other food film festival was doing that. A giant like Berlin with their culinary program for years that just actually closed out just before COVID. But they were a huge, prominent, sidebar of the Berlin Film Festival. They were arguably one of the largest, but they didn't do all the workshops, all the experiential tours, all the, the things that kind of rounded our program out. So it was true to one in one respect, not in others.
So when you so I didn't realize that sort of the genesis of it was actually Michael and his group of chefs with this festival in its own right, and they were looking to grow it. So when the two of you decided to collaborate on this, what did it look like in your mind at that point? Like, did you have this big, grand, long-term vision for it, or was it just kind of very much, a couple of people scrabbling to do something really cool and different?
It's funny, I still feel like that. Well, I will step back just he had gotten one edition off, and he had started it with Slow Food Nova Scotia locally. Mm-hmm. And it had been modeled after a film festival that was in Bologna, Italy, called Slow Food on Film. That's why it was called the Slow Motion Food Film Fest in the first couple of years, actually. So it was always kind of rooted in that slow food ethos, knowing and understanding where your food comes from, issues related to anything up and down the food chain, everything as it reaches your plate, essentially. Mm-hmm. So in the early years, it really was a grassroots effort. It was hugely volunteer. A lot of the films we screened were issues-based. And then as time went on, we started to grow the program in terms of the, scaling up to celebrity chef dinners and tours and culinary workshops and film workshops. So yeah, and it just kind of steadily grew from that point on. But the picture in our head, I don't know. It sure is a wonderful picture looking back the other direction. Did we know it every time? I mean, I think we always had big lofty ideas about mm-hmm. where we saw it, that we wanted it to be noticed on a global stage, not just here locally. We didn't want to be just a regional festival. We never wanted to be that. And a lot of it had to do with after the first couple of editions, we actually started to travel the event. Yes. And that really, really helped, get that sort of brand and exposure and partners and media and interest from other parts of the world. We simply were never going to get it by staying in one spot and hoping they all showed up and found out about us. It really was about taking the risk and getting out there in front of other people and essentially bringing them back here, which is what's happened.
And I definitely want to talk about that in a minute. That was definitely one of the things that really piqued my attention when you were starting to really grow the festival was the road trips that you were doing. But before even that, what made you decide to stay so close to home and choose Wolfville as the festival location? Because I'm sure there were a lot of people who were... Wolfville is a small place. Let's be mm-hmm. really honest. It's a small place, and it's not far from Halifax, but it's not, I don't think it would be called a suburb in the same way that like Mississauga is to Toronto or something like that. But I'm sure you had people who were coming at you and saying, when are you going to move this to Halifax? Or when are you going to move it to a bigger city kind of thing? And you have stayed in Wolfville and you have made it a destination event. Mm-hmm. So was that a really conscious decision from the get-go that this is where we're going to be and we're going to make this the most amazing event in this city that we possibly can?
Well, actually, yes, because it started, like I said, Michael had started it, and it's where he had a restaurant and where he was living at the time here with his family. So it was always going to be here over the years. And I always was living in Halifax and driving back and forth for about a decade until actually COVID. And I just moved here about a year ago. I've said I was driving in the wrong direction every time I left a meeting. But the wonderful thing about it being here, so Wolfville is situated in kind of the culinary and agricultural and burgeoning new wine region of Scotia. It's a place where global warming is serving this area well, especially as a wine tourism destination. It just, in the last even 5 years, so as our growth has tracked, so has the towns and the regions. All these new wineries and everything that's been happening, we've kind of been on the same similar track. It's like, Soyuz or the Niagara region 20 years ago. Right. So it just kind of hitting this wonderful peak at the same time. The reason that, in the early years and to this day, that a lot of government supporters, especially the provincial government and Community Culture and Heritage, has named us a signature event and supported us is because we picked a rural destination, and we picked it at a time of year when that sort of natural wave of tourism is kind of is already peaked. So you're drawing people to the region in an otherwise time of year they might not. It's sort of like extending the tourism season, as it were. Mm-hmm. And then also another wonderful thing about this town is that it's got a university, Acadia University. So there's basically all these different things that make this a wonderful, wonderful place to host a festival like this. The other thing is that, from running a film festival in Halifax, the Atlantic Film Festival for so many years, I always felt no matter how loud we carried on or the advertising we bought, there's nothing we could do to feel like we owned the space. You could often wander around parts of the city because it was big enough without knowing our festival was going on. So the thing about having it in a town this size is that you can basically own it, and there's nowhere you can go without not seeing us. So it's basically like painting the whole town with this Devour wand. And businesses and locals are so interested in what we have going on here. So it's just nice to own a space and see people who are attending the festival and filmmakers and chefs forming fast friendships and on the streets of Wolfville. So
yeah, again, I think there's something to be said for that from a business perspective. I think sometimes we do these things from our heart because we have a connection or we feel, in your case, Michael and his family were living there, had a restaurant there, and we don't necessarily realize from a business perspective how big of an impact that can have on it in the long run. Because like you said, you've niched down into this festival that is culinary, but you've also taken over this town once a year where, like you said, you own the space and the town becomes Devour. It's exactly. and that's a really interesting way to think about marketing yourself for those who are listening. Just when you are small and thinking that being small is a detriment to what you're doing, and often it's really not. We did a whole episode with Gabby Payton, who's from St. John's, and talking about how being in a small town after living in Toronto for quite a while, living in a small town has presented her with opportunities that she never would have had being in a bigger city where you're just one of many, but in a small town you become the one.
Yeah, part of the fabric.
Exactly, without trying to make it sound egotistical or anything like that. But it, like you said, part of the fabric. That's a really great way to describe it. I love the fact that you guys have stayed with Wolfville, and when you do immerse yourself in a town like that, the relationships that you're able to form are so much stronger because I'm sure you have these really tight ties with the people who run B&Bs or hotels and the other restaurants in the town and the people in the town themselves, who I'm sure are probably pretty excited every year to see what you guys are going to be presenting.
Yeah, of course. And just to harken back, when you asked about, have people asked us to move at other places, all the time. Halifax, Toronto, all kinds of places. And we just kind of firmly stood our ground, and it's actually led to other festivals popping up in other places.
Yeah, we had the same thing with the Food Bloggers of Canada conference. We were constantly asked why we move it around every year. Why don't you just have it in Toronto? That's where you should be. So I was pretty sure you guys had probably experienced something pretty similar. You also secured some pretty high profile chefs quite early out of the gate. I think particularly Anthony Bourdain, that was kind of a watershed moment, I would say, for you guys. Would that be fair to say?
Absolutely. Yeah. Basically, we knew, when we really started to plot out how we were going to get attention here, we went for our dream guy because he sort of perfectly straddled the world of food and film through his writing, through his TV shows, through his personality. So we thought, if we get him here, if we can do anything we can to get that guy here, we'll never have to spend marketing funds ever again, because it's like we're sort of buying our place in the map. And it's kind of how it played out, because people were shocked. It was a 2-year effort to get him here.
I can imagine. Yeah.
Many agents and chef friends and you name it. So by the time he actually got here, we even had articles in the USA Weekender, saying, why the heck is Bourdain going to Nova Scotia? And we were actually one of his only stops that year while he was producing his CNN show. He came to us for 18 hours and was gone to, I can't even remember where, somewhere very exotic, following us. So,
did you ever get a sense of what it was about the festival that made him finally say yes?
I think it's because we appealed to the film part. I mean, even seeing the new movie Roadrunner, his excitement about film references and literary references. So when we said to him, we want to launch this program where basically every year we get somebody from the food or the film industry to open our festival with their favorite food film of all time and come tell us why. And that sort of actually has piqued the interest of many guests ever since, because it's a very strange question to be asked. It's a lot of fun to curate something.
Yeah.
And then it just naturally leads into a discussion of the person's life and passion and work. So it's been our kind of it's the one retro title per festival, and it's always kind of it's our opening night to kick it off. So he was going to be the first one to start the program. Right. So he liked the idea of that. It really was the film side that pulled it in for sure.
Yeah, and I think that too is another interesting thing from the perspective of our listeners, is that there's always a way to draw the person in that you are hoping to draw in. Yes. You just have to find what that carrot is for them that piques their interest and makes them think, oh, you know what, that would be really cool. That would be a fun evening. I'd be up for that.
Yeah, it's almost always that little passion project in their back pocket.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. And so when he came on board, like you said, you knew you probably wouldn't have to worry about marketing ever again. And I know that we're going to talk about the grassroots marketing piece in a moment, but I do think there's some truth in that assumption. You certainly got name recognition from that. It was like, wow, What is this festival? We need to know more about this. Definitely paid off.
It really did. I mean, more than we could have imagined, obviously.
Yeah, absolutely. But speaking of that, I don't want to minimize the amount of grassroots marketing you guys have done, because you have done a lot. And it's one of the things that I have watched very quietly in the background over the years, because I have just been fascinated with how you have taken this, and particularly what you have done by taking Devour on the road. And it was something we did with you many years ago. I think it was our Vancouver or our Montreal.
I think it's a Montreal event.
Was it conference? Yeah. And
because we come up, but it was the program of films.
Yeah, so we did a little mini Devour. One of the things, just to give the audience a little background, is the event that I ran almost always was either just before the festival or in the midst of the festival. And so we were never able to attend because we were so caught up in our own event. And so we sat down with Lia one year, and she suggested that we bring the festival to the event, which was a food event, so it was a great fit. And we did a little mini Devour festival one night after dinner. And honestly, out of all the events I have done over the years, that is one of my biggest highlights and one of my most favorite things that we have ever done. It was such a special moment, and the films that you curated for that were such a great fit. And so you have done many more of these. I know you've gone to wine country in California, and I know you've done several throughout North America, and I think you've done some internationally at this point as well.
We have, kind of all over.
Yeah.
In, I'd say 2019, our last pre-COVID season, the events actually grew to 17 across Canada and around the world. And they could be anything from like a little marketing one-off, like our program launch at the Toronto Film Festival, to events with other film festivals and multi-year actually. So we were working with like-minded festivals. So the Sonoma Festival, International Film Festival, the Long Beach International Film Festival that has a huge food program, the Vero Beach and Film and Wine Festival. So we were always kind of popping in to do like a one-night gala event with short films and food. And then also through time, we started to get hired by host properties, places like the Jasper Park Lodge or the Fogo Island Inn, to come and bring a mini Devour to a weekend in these places, which was really rewarding and fun for the attendees. So it's a way to sort of give a little taste of Devour, to get a little like potential attendee and media interest, and then allow the guests to, of course, enjoy the host property or place.
Right.
So in the very, oh, sorry?
I was just going to say that's really smart.
Yeah, well, in the very beginning, it was kind of us taking oysters and suitcases, all over with beg, borrow, and, wine and whatever we could get to, in the end, in 2019, everything was either supported and paid for by everywhere we went. So building that program and having people understand the importance of getting out into these spaces, and again, sort of trying to own them like we do the festival back home, the flagship festival. So it became a really rewarding and great way to get the name and the brand as far as we could. Obviously, we haven't traveled in 2 years for COVID.
Yeah, definitely. That's been a roadblock for events for sure. Are you able to utilize grant money and things like that? Because I think that's something a lot of artists in Canada don't necessarily realize, and not just artists, but anyone who is working within the arts. So whether it's a film festival or you are developing a magazine or anything that sort of showcases Canadian arts and culture, there's a lot of grant money available to help you grow the idea you have in your head. And I don't know if that's something that you guys have taken advantage of or used.
Yeah, I mean, so we are a not-for-profit and registered charity. So our funding makeup is across 3 levels of government, and then of course corporate partners and private donors. So in terms of the government funding, we're supported by agencies like Telefilm Canada that supports our film program. We've had NSBI, so it's a group called the Nova Scotia Business Initiative, and they've supported outbound events, especially when we were doing events and taking local food and wine with us and developing opportunities for those producers to go in market somewhere else. There's always like an angle where you can get funds and kind of go out in a direction. We've also had support from our provincial government, community culture and heritage locally, and it's operational funding to run our event. And yeah, it's a whole layers of funding and grant writing make up all of this.
Yeah, definitely. It can be quite a labyrinth to kind of work your way through. And I know it's something I've considered for the podcast actually, but I haven't got there yet. But just thinking about like how to even go about it as a whole.
Well, it's one of those things because when I was working at the Atlantic Film Festival, I was never raising any of the money. I was just focused on curation and marketing. But when you're running your own event and you're building it from the ground up, I never had a picture in my head that I could get out there and sell something or pitch something to a partner, basically ask for money or write a grant. But what's amazing is when you strip it all down, if you're passionate about what you're doing, you'll find the words they'll come out.
Right.
Yeah. And also a lot of people are very generous with their time and showing you how to write grants. In the very beginning, we kind of hired a wonderful person to come in and sort of show us how to tackle some of this stuff, because every grant's different, all the language, their goals, what they want to achieve and see, it's different across the board. But once you get into, thinking about your own project or space or business, yeah, if you're passionate about it, it'll come out.
I would actually like to do a podcast episode on grants, like for arts and culture, because I think it's just an area that is not utilized as much as it could be, but it's also one that I think for a lot of people is overwhelming. So
it's so overwhelming. And it's funny because, like I said, I never had that plan in my head and I never wanted to do it. But now, all these years in, one of my favorite parts of the job is the relationships I have with the people handling those grants.
Oh, that is
because it's like I really get a kick out of it, and I enjoy, when, because they're on board. They're basically there to make sure you do get the funding and keep it and see your event through. So, you're always talking to them, and then when the actual event hits and they happen to walk in the room, it's actually a very rewarding part of the job, because we would certainly not be here without it.
That's very heartening to hear, that you have good relationships with all of those people. And I do think when you come at something initially from an entrepreneurial perspective, the idea of asking for money from anyone other than maybe a bank is just not in your DNA at first. Like, it's just not something you would think to.
Yeah, at all.
You mean there's people who will give me money? Like, that's so strange, and I don't have to give it back. It's but the idea being that you are going to use it to generate revenue in a way that benefits many other people. So
of course,
you
community as a whole.
Yes, you pay it back in a different way.
Yep.
So okay, so did you ever have a moment, maybe you haven't had the moment yet, I don't know, maybe you have, where you went, wow, okay, we've arrived, kind of thing, or is that something that is maybe you don't feel that way yet? I don't know.
I'd say I have lots of little moments. I feel very lucky that way. I mean, obviously the Bourdain one was a huge one.
Right.
I didn't even believe that was going to happen. In fact, I had the limo driver who was picking him up had to text me to tell me he was actually in the car. Just did not feel real. But standing in that room on that seminal night or opening night where every chef in the region wanted to cook for Bourdain, and walking him through the space in the room, that was a very big moment. It just felt like all eyes on the festival, and maybe we were really going to get somewhere. But I mean, there's so many little moments all the time, and every festival there's just a moment where I'm like, okay, I've never seen this one before. Okay, what is this? It's just like, it's this situation, But yes, I mean, even every year as the festival comes together, I can't believe right now as we're launching our full program this week and we're still building it behind the scenes. It just never feels quite real. But here it is again.
No, it's one of those really strange things, because you're so caught up in the weeds of it all sometimes that it's just the next step. Okay, what's the next thing I have to do on my list, kind of thing. And sometimes it's a little weird. You get that one moment where you have a chance to sort of step back and breathe, and you sort of look around yourself and you're like, wow, this is crazy.
Like, I'm usually buried in a Google Doc spreadsheet or in the back end of our website somewhere. And then all of a sudden we have a staff meeting. It's like, there's real people and they're back again.
Yeah, it's surreal moments sometimes. I think that's part of being a business owner. There's just a lot of surreal moments where
for sure
shake your head. One of the things that really fascinates me about what you do is the whole selection process, the whole act of curating a film festival. And how do you go through the process of deciding who you want to have there? Because that's got to be really difficult. I am sure I don't know how many films you screen a year before you make your final decisions, but I am sure that there are just some really gut-wrenching decisions that you have to make. And do you have like a process that you go through when you're doing that? I'm sure you have criteria that are in place based on your theme for the year and other pieces of the puzzle, but the act of actually curating is something that's quite unique, and it's creative in its own way, because you're trying to say something with what you're bringing together in that curated environment. So I'm just curious if we could talk a little bit about that, like how you go through the process of it and what it's like being in charge of showcasing the work of other people.
Well, as I'm sure you imagine, curation is happening all the time behind the scenes. In fact, next year and the year out from that, the themes are already we're circling around them already.
Right.
So basically what happens is we watch about 300 films in total per year to make up our program of, typically in a non-COVID year, it'd be about 100 events over the week of the festival, with about 80-ish films in that mix, probably about a quarter of them features and the rest shorts. What we basically have is a running giant big wish list with every food personality, chef, and filmmaker related to food behind the scenes. That's ridiculous and would be fun to share with the world. A secret space that Michael and I share, because it's just a running wish list of contacts and ideas. Right. We always want to have either a theme or a celebrity figure that's going to draw a lot of attention, but we also want to be in a space where we're known for discoveries too, and bringing in the next up and comers. So it's a real mix. But in terms of the film part, the curation of the films, so basically we start out at the top of, or actually right now I have a list started for next year's films, and we spend the year collecting titles. We have a huge, again, a spreadsheet of films, and we research online, we go to other festivals or look through other festivals when we're able to travel, of course, and kind of amass this massive list of titles. And then usually by early springish, I just start doing invitations and getting as many films as I can through the door. Simultaneously, we also put our call out on a platform called Film Freeway, so filmmakers can find us in their own way as well.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
Yeah, so it's kind of like a little bit of some submissions, but the bulk is still, mostly invited.
Right.
Because it's really us trying to find those films and trying to find food-related titles as best we can.
Yeah.
And that really is, we stretch the niche to make it fit. We've shown, Spanish dramas where someone was murdered by wine bottles. Like, you know what? It's in. That's good enough. And then obviously more in-depth things like, immigrant farm workers or soil diversification, like kind of a little bit of everything.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you do. And you do like a nice mix of documentary style and more, I don't know what the word is in filmmaking, but fiction style, like.
Yeah, drama.
Drama, thank you. Yeah. But I would imagine part of curating, I mean, you must feel a sense of responsibility to the people whose work you're showcasing, to make sure that it's shown in, I don't know if a good light is the right phrase, but you want to respect the finished products that people are sharing with your audience. And I imagine there's a lot of responsibility that you feel wrapped up in that.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, as much as we can, we try to get, again, in a non-COVID year, try to get filmmakers here to talk to the audience directly. A lot of our films also have panels following, especially if you're getting into something that's really issue-based.
Right.
But yes, of course, even if it's a fun drama about cannibalism or something, because we have considered that because people are eating. We of course we try to screen it and have it go off as perfectly as possible, because it takes a lot of energy to make a film, and a lot of people and a lot of money. So we try to do right by them all the time.
As you've referenced the pandemic, is there a business out there that hasn't been impacted by the pandemic? I don't think so. But for what you do, because the film festival is a very destination-driven event, you are bringing people to Nova Scotia and every year, and you are also traveling with the festival, and all of a sudden that stopped. And like many others out there, I'm sure that there was some moments of sheer panic and that happened with that, and yet you were able to pivot and continue on, and the festival still happened last year. It just happened in a different format. And maybe you can talk a little bit about what that pandemic, it's still happening, it's still going on. So how that's really impacted. Yes, I know, it's still going on. And I think it's probably going to be going on for a little while yet. But you've managed to pivot. And I know last year was a big pivot for you. This year you are going back to the in-person model, but it's still a bit of a hybrid this year as well, I believe.
Yeah. So for last year, we actually did an in-person segment, if you can believe that.
Oh, really?
We had this very, I mean, in Nova Scotia, we did very well for quite a long time.
An Atlantic bubble, that was the envy of the rest of the country.
It really was for a long period of time. And so we were actually one of the only festivals in Atlantic Canada, and I think across Canada at that time. There's a little window that opened up in October. So our pivot was everything went online, and that was a whole new universe for all film festivals everywhere.
Yeah.
To be able to stream and figure out all of that, because that is a a huge undertaking unto itself. But we were able to also hold the event in person, and we had about 1,600 people through, which is incredible.
Oh wow! Yeah.
Our event was a third of the size, and we just spaced and cleaned and did all the COVID protocols. And it was funny because when it finally wrapped, and it was a very different event. No one traveled in for it. It was all locals. But it was a year where I feel like our staff reconnected on a level that we haven't before. So that was a wonderful thing. We had a couple partners that came to us and said, if you think you can pull a festival off, you still have your funding. So with our entrepreneurial spirit and, damn the pandemic, we got it off. And it was funny, on the last Sunday of the event, one of our publicists said, so when we issue the press release tomorrow about the success of the event, and I was like, hold it, we're going to wait 2 weeks to make sure we're not a super spreader. And then we released our numbers and talked about it. And we really have Michael and I have spent, parts of the year actually giving talks about best practices and what we did. So knowing that going into this year, yes, here we are again. And yes, we aren't in Nova Scotia moved to a phase 5 yet, so we're waiting for an announcement about just how big can we open up the event. We're not as scared as some events that had to shut down, and have a 1.5 to 2 years off. This is actually our second, which is hence why we've called it the expanded hybrid, which is just funny to me, all this terminology. But I mean, the whole thing right now is that we're about to launch the program this week. We're selling it at a capacity that, as if it's still slightly shut down, because we thought if we went out whole hog with tickets, how would we claw them back?
Yeah.
So we're just planning for one capacity level, and if it opens up, we'll go a little further. So that's where we sit now.
Yeah, and that's been part of the pandemic from the beginning. Is it's just kind of wait and see. A lot of wait and see. But you're going ahead with it this year, and let's talk a little bit about this year's festival before we wrap up, because it is going to be live and in person, and it's running from October 19th to the 24th. And maybe you can tell us a little bit about your theme this year, because it's quite an exciting one.
Yeah, so for a number of years, we've been working with Glooscap First Nation here locally on a couple of events. And one of the main people that we've always worked with, Sabrina Whitman, is now sitting on our advisory panel. So when we were thinking about themes, like thematics, about, what could this year's festival be, we started circling around the idea of global Indigenous cinnamon cuisine. Some of our past themes have been, regional, or the power of women in gastronomy, and all kinds of things. But this just seemed timely. Mm-hmm. And so we had been working with a wonderful chef named Joseph Shawana. He was supposed to be the only chef we were going to bring in last year, which of course didn't happen. Right. So now it's expanded through his guidance. And we've now, any chef that's coming to the event, and there's about 8 people coming from across Canada, the States, Finland, and Mexico, if you can believe it. I mean, fingers crossed.
Yeah.
And everyone traveling in is Indigenous. And this theme is probably about 40% of our event now, in terms of events and films, film content, and of course they will all be cooking across the event and culinary workshops and some of our community give back events. So it's really taken this wonderful shape.
Yeah.
This program.
It looks very exciting, and you have a very iconic headline guest this year.
Yes, we do. So the venerated Thompson Highway is going to be joining us with his favorite food film of all time, Tampopo. Thompson is a Governor General Award-winning playwright, musician, storyteller, and he's coming in for a couple of events. He's going to do the regular sort of, open the event with his food film, but then he's also doing our first concert the next night, which is going to be a fundraiser for Glooscap First Nation.
Oh,
so
exciting.
We're just excited to we've always wanted to add a bit of music into our program. I mean, we have through parties and receptions, but this just brings it into our purview a little better.
Yeah, I mean, music and food go together. They really do. So what are you most looking forward to at this year's festival? Do you have something that's really caught your eye?
I'm really looking forward to, we're opening the festival with a traditional Maui Omi, basically a powwow, right outside our main Devour headquarters. And I think that's just going to be such a wonderful celebratory way to kick off the entire event with dancing and drumming and food and people. I'm just looking forward to people mostly.
Yes.
Yeah.
I'm super excited for you. I'm so happy that you can do this in person this year in a bigger way, and I'm sure that the entire town of Wolfville is excited about it as well. So yeah, for people who are wondering, tickets go on sale
Thursday, September 23rd.
Thursday. Okay, so by the time this airs, tickets will be on sale. And you are potentially having a second batch of tickets go on sale later, depending on how things go pandemic-wise.
Yeah, exactly. So people can just go to our website at devourfest.com and the whole program will be there. So as I mentioned, a limited amount or sort of the first block of tickets at the diminished capacity will go out now. And then by October 4th, when our provincial government makes a decision about what stage we're at, then we'll release more at that time.
Yeah, fingers crossed that will happen. And I don't know if Nova Scotia is going the way of vaccine passports, if that's something you're doing, but that might make things a little easier. It's hard to say.
It'll be proof of vaccination, and that's what will be required for basically an event right now here that you have to. Yeah. We're building a whole ticketing system so that you basically certify as you're buying a ticket that you're double vaxxed.
Awesome.
And we'll be spotting people as they come into the building and into any of our venues just to keep everybody safe.
Yeah, that is great. So for those of you who are interested in purchasing tickets or being involved in the event, as Lia said, they're on sale now. By the time you listen to this is going out on the 24th, so it'll be the day after tickets go on sale. And we will have links to everything in the show notes, both to the website and to Devour Fest's social media, so that you can check it out. And like I said, the mini version of Devour that I was able to view was just lovely. I just can't think of another word to say. It was really something that, some laughter, some tears, some thought-provoking moments, and it was really such a great experience. So I'm so glad we were able to do that, and I cannot wait until I can actually go to an actual Devour Fest
event. Well, the other thing I wanted to add too for your national or international listeners is that the whole program will be online as well. And so you can purchase individual streaming tickets. You can do a films only streaming pass. There's going to be a couple options. So you can watch a culinary workshop taking place right here or watch a film. And that's the world now, right?
Yeah, that's great. And as you said, it is an expanded hybrid version this year.
Yes, expanded hybrid.
So
full festival in 2022.
Yeah, I now that I no longer have the event that I put on at the same time, my my fall has opened up. So
Yes. So we look forward to welcoming you here soon.
yes, and I love Nova Scotia. It's one of my favorite places to visit. All of Atlantic Canada is just, I think it's just if you're a coast person, you're a coast person. And whether it's the West Coast or the East Coast, there's something about coastal living.
Yeah, I totally agree.
So what is next for Devour, and what's next for you once this year's festival has gone off without a hitch?
Well, I mean, it'll take some time and energy to go back to a full festival after 2 years of being kind of half the size.
Right.
So we'll head into that. Hopefully we can remount some of our satellite events, sort of the long running ones. We're supposed to, if we can, the first event is to go to Christmas in November at the Jasper Park Lodge in November, or sorry, I said that, to celebrate, to promote and be a part of that event, along with a bunch of Food Network chefs like the Vikram Vidges and Susar Lees of the world. Right. We'll be doing Devour presentations and promoting an event that we hope to remount there in the spring following. So yeah, just getting that sort of stuff back up and rolling, and working towards a full festival once again.
Yeah, I certainly hope that 2022 is the year that we can all move on and get back to, I don't want to say get back to normal, because I think we all learned a lot of lessons through the pandemic that maybe normal wasn't the best thing, but certainly get back to being together as humans, coming together in person. That is something I think everybody is really craving at this point.
I would say, yes.
Well, Lia, thank you so much for joining us this week. It has been so nice to catch up with you and to have you on the show. And as I mentioned to everybody, we will have all the details for this year's festival in the show notes on our website at andshелookedup.com. And you can also visit the festival's website at devourfest.com. Yeah, so you can check everything out. You can see the program that's available this year. You can purchase tickets and enjoy some culinary films, culinary events. Okay, thanks, Lia, for being here. It was a pleasure, and all the best of luck with this year's event.
Well, thank you so much for having me. It's great to talk to you, and it's an honor to be on your show.
Oh, thank you. Okay, everybody, that is it for this week. We'll be back next week with another new episode, and thanks for joining us. We'll talk to you all soon. Thank you so much for joining us for the And She Looked Up Creative Hour. If you're looking for links or resources mentioned in this episode, you can find detailed show notes on our website at andshелookedup.com. While you're there, be sure to sign up for our newsletter for more business tips, profiles of inspiring Canadian creative women, and so much more. If you enjoyed this episode, please be sure to subscribe to the show via your podcast app of choice so you never miss an episode. We always love to hear from you, so we'd love it if you'd leave us a review through iTunes or Apple Podcasts. Drop us a note via our website at andshелookedup.com, or come say hi on Instagram at andshелookedup. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next week.